Welcome to Go to Sleep Historian, where history drifts softly into dreams. If you haven't yet, take a moment to subscribe so you never miss another quiet journey through the past. Now, settle in, let the world fade away, and let's begin today's story, Before Clocks. How ancient civilizations measured time. Imagine a world without clocks, without even knowing what time it is right now. How did ancient civilizations schedule their days, plant their crops, or even know when to celebrate? Get ready to uncover the astonishing ingenuity of our ancestors as we explore their incredible methods for measuring time long before the tic-tac of any clock. Ever felt completely lost without your phone or a clock? Now, picture navigating life without asterisk. Any asterisk concept of precise time. This video isn't just a history lesson. It's a journey into the minds of brilliant ancient civilizations who, without our technology, developed breathtakingly accurate ways to understand days, seasons, and even years. Prepare to be amazed by their timeless wisdom. They dawned before timekeeping, before there were clocks, before the ticking of gears or the whisper of pendulums. There was only the world itself, vast, silent, and filled with patterns waiting to be noticed. Imagine, for a moment, a time when no one could name an hour, when the passing of a day was felt, not counted. The early humans, our distant ancestors, stood beneath endless skies, guided not by calendars, but by instinct, by the rhythm of light and shadow, warmth and chill. The first timekeeper was the sun. Every morning it rose in the east, painting the horizon gold, and every evening it sank behind distant hills, leaving the earth in blue twilight. In this dependable cycle, our ancestors began to sense something profound, that the world moved with purpose, that life flowed through a rhythm larger than themselves. They watched the world awaken each morning. Birds beginning their songs at dawn, shadows stretching long and thin, and then shrinking again as the day matured. The dance of the sun across the sky was the most reliable thing they knew. And so, in those early ages, time was not a number. It was a feeling. The warmth of the morning sun meant it was time to hunt. The cooling of the wind told them the day was ending. The rising moon guided their fires at night. The moon, too, became a silent teacher. Its phases crescent, half, full, repeated in graceful cycles, marking the passage of weeks before the word week even existed. Early peoples carved the moon's changing face into bones and stones, tracking its dance across the months. These ancient marks, found in caves and on tools tens of thousands of years old, may be humanity's very first calendars. To them, the moon was more than a light in the darkness. It was a clock that hung above the world, visible to all, predictable yet mysterious. Farmers, hunters, and travelers learned to read it like a story. When to plant, when to travel, when to rest. The stars followed their own eternal routes. Each night, as fires burned low and the wind carried songs across open plains, people looked up and noticed familiar shapes returning again and again, constellations that told stories and whispered secrets about direction and season. These patterns of the heavens spoke of time in ways both subtle and profound. They revealed when winter would come, when rains might fall, when herds would migrate. And as generations passed, people began to record what they saw, first in memory, then in markings, then in monuments aligned perfectly with the skies. Long before clocks, humanity's first sense of time was written across the heavens and the earth. Every sunrise was a beginning, every sunset a quiet ending, a living world of rhythm. To the ancients, time wasn't something measured, it was something lived. They didn't hurry through moments or divide them into minutes. They watched, waited, and adapted. The day's rhythm flowed naturally. Morning for work, midday for rest, evening for gathering. The body and the world moved together in harmony. The sounds of nature, the calling of birds, the hum of insects, the shifting light served as their reminders. When you imagine it, there's something peaceful in that life. No alarms, no schedules, only the whisper of dawn and the slow, certain passing of seasons. Time was circular then, not linear. Every dawn was followed by dusk, and every spring returned again. as if the world itself were breathing in gentle repetition. The birth of curiosity, but the human mind is never still for long. Somewhere, someone, perhaps a hunter, a priest, or a curious child, began to wonder why the shadows changed their length, why the stars shifted across the night, why the moon's face grew and faded. This quiet curiosity sparked one of humanity's greatest quests, the attempt to capture the invisible, to measure the Over time, people realized that by watching shadows closely, they could guess the hour. By counting moon cycles, they could predict seasons. By tracing the stars, they could map the year. And from that slow, patient observation, the idea of timekeeping was born, not in one place or one culture, but across the world, and scattered parallel sparks of ingenuity. The first silent instruments in the warm valleys of Egypt, priests noticed how the shadows of temple columns changed predictably through the day. They began placing stones and poles to mark the movement of the sun. These primitive sundials were not precise, but they revealed the great truth that the sky itself could serve as a clock. In Mesopotamia, where astronomers watched the heavens from Tolzi, they recorded the rising and setting of stars, building calendars that guided both harvests and kings. In China, scholars noted the length of shadows and the tilt of the sun, linking cosmic cycles with the order of society. Every civilization, in its own quiet way, reached for the same mystery: how to bring the flow of time into human understanding. Time as a teacher, the ancients did not only measure time, they listened to it. Each passing moment was a teacher. They saw that the same stars, which guided farmers, also guided travelers across deserts and seas. They realized that the pulse of time could shape entire civilizations, that temples could align with solstices, and that the rising of Sirius could announce the Nile's flood. In this harmony between heaven and earth, time became sacred. It was not merely practical, it was spiritual. Priests prayed at dawn and dusk, aligning human life with cosmic rhythm. Festivals were celebrated at the turning of seasons, and entire cultures danced to the music of the sky, the memory of time. Archaeologists today still find traces of this deep relationship. Circles of stone that frame the sun at mid, cave markings that track the moon's cycles, and ancient writings that name each phase of light and shadow. These early artifacts are not just scientific instruments, they are expressions of awe. They tell us that long before humanity learned to build machines, we learned to notice. And perhaps that noticing, that stillness, that awareness, was our first true invention. The ancient world's greatest teachers were patience and observation. To build a sundial or record the stars required long, unbroken attention, years of quiet study across generations. In that sense, every ancient astronomer was also a poet, every builder of calendars, a dreamer. The silence between moments. If you stand today in a field at dawn, the world is not so different from theirs. The same sun will rise. The same stars will fade. The same cool air will hum softly with awakening life. In that moment, you can almost feel what they must have felt. A stillness before time. A whisper that something vast and eternal moves around us, marking each day not by numbers, but by light. The ticking clock and the glowing screen came much later. But before those, Tere was Tis, the heartbeat of the earth itself. A gentle ending as our ancestors slowly learned to follow that heartbeat. They began to imagine ways to capture it, to turn sunlight, water, and starlight into instruments. That journey, from watching shadows to crafting sundials, from dripping water to precise measurement, would change civilization forever. But it all began here, with open skies, curious eyes, and the quiet rhythm of the world. The dawn before timekeeping. The moment when humanity first listened and learned that even silence moves. The shadows speak. The sun has always been our oldest companion. It rises, it falls, it returns, constant, patient, and eternal. Long before the first clock ever ticked, the ancients realized that the sun was more than a giver of warmth and light. It was a storyteller. Its shadow told secrets of passing hours to those who learned to watch closely enough. Somewhere, thousands of years ago, a curious mind must have noticed it first. Perhaps a shepherd in an open field, standing beside his staff, saw how its shadow stretched long in the morning, curled shorter at noon, and then lengthened again toward evening. That pattern never changed. It was steady, predictable, and strangely comforting. The world's first silent language of time. From that simple observation, a quiet revolution began. People started to place sticks in the ground, stones in the sand, pillars beside temples, all to study how shadows moved. Slowly, deliberately, they began to understand that the sun could be persuaded to speak, if only one knew how to listen. In Egypt, under the vast gold of desert skies, priests and astronomers marked the ground beside sacred temples. They watched the shadows of tall obelisks crawl across the sand, like the hands of an unseen clock. These were the first sundials, born not from machinery, but from sunlight and imagination. Each passing shadow was a whisper from the heavens, reminding them of the eternal cycle of day and night, of life and death. The Egyptians called these devices shadow clocks. They divided the day into sections by the movement of the sun's light along carved lines or evenly spaced stones. And while their time was not precise as we think of it now, it was astonishingly regular enough to mark prayers, to guide workers, and to plan the daily rhythms of temples and fields. As centuries passed, this idea drifted across lands and cultures, carried by merchants and scholars. The Babylonians, with their gift for mathematics, began to measure shadow lengths carefully, creating tables that could predict the hour by the position of the sun. In Greece, where philosophy and geometry shaped the world, sundials became works of art. Carefully angled plates of bronze and marble, their markings calibrated to the latitude of each city. To stand before one was to witness a meeting of science and poetry, the earth itself turning time into form. And yet, even as sundials grew more refined, their nature remained deeply human. A sundial could not function without sunlight. It slept at night, silent and untroubled, just as the world itself did. There was a rhythm to it, an acceptance that time was not constant, but alive, flowing differently with each season and each place. Imagine an ancient craftsman carving the first precise gnomon, the slender rod whose shadow marks the hour. He aligns it carefully toward the north, tilts it to match the angle of the Earth's axis, and steps back to watch its shadow fall upon a stone dial. At that moment he has captured something miraculous, a way to measure what cannot be held, using nothing but sunlight and patience. In Greece, philosophers like Anaximander, and later Eudoxus, perfected these instruments. Some sundials were small enough to carry. Others were grand installations, set before temples or town squares. Their inscriptions spoke gently of the passing day. Not 8 o'clock or 3 o'clock, but simply the division of light itself. Morning, mid-morning, noon, afternoon, evening. The ancients measured not numbers, but moments. And beyond Greece, in the east, the Persians and later the Indians built their own versions. Intricate stone observatories where sunlight traced its arc across carefully sculpted walls. In China, great bronze sundials were placed in imperial gardens, surrounded by silence and ceremony. Each civilization saw in the sundial not merely a tool, but a bridge between heaven and earth, between the divine order of the cosmos and the human need to understand it. The sundial's language was universal, but also humble. It spoke through shadows, through absence rather than sound. The passing of time was not marked by noise or motion, but by stillness. The kind of stillness that invites reflection. Watching a sundial was, in its own way, a meditation. The longer one watched, the more one realized that time itself was not rushing anywhere. It was simply unfolding. There's something profoundly peaceful about that idea. That time could be measured by waiting, by observing the light as it moved across stone. For the ancients, this was not only practical, it was spiritual. Each hour was connected to the sun's divine power, a reminder of the harmony that bound the heavens and the earth together. In Egypt, temple rituals were aligned with the movement of shadows. The rising of the sun marked the first prayers. The lengthening of the afternoon shadows signaled offerings to the gods. To them, the sun was not merely light. It was Ra himself, the great traveler across the sky, whose journey from dawn to dusk was the heartbeat of the world. And so, every day, The people watched the shadow of Ra move across their land. When the shadow was short, the god stood above them. When it stretched long, he was retreating toward the horizon. In those shifting lines of darkness and light, they found a language older than writing, one that told them not only the hour, but their place within the turning of the world. But as beautiful as sundials were, they were not perfect. They were bound to the sun, and thus to the weather and the seasons. A cloudy day could hide the shadow completely. Winter sun fell low, stretching the shadow differently than summer's high blaze. Each latitude changed the angle. Each land required its own calibration. Yet, rather than frustration, the ancients found beauty in this imperfection. It reminded them that time was alive, ever-changing, something to be observed, not controlled. A sundial did not force the world to obey a rule. It simply mirrored what was already there. The Romans later brought sundials across their empire, setting them in forums and gardens. They marked the hours so people could know when to meet, when to rest, when to eat. But as they spread, something curious happened. People began to notice the differences in time from place to place. The shadow that showed noon in Rome might strike differently in Athens or Alexandria. Time, they realized, was not the same everywhere. It belonged to the sky above each land, and so, even in its imperfection, the sundial carried a quiet truth. That time is not universal, but local, personal, shaped by where we stand and what we see. As night fell, the sundials rested, their voices fading with the light. But the idea they carried did not sleep. The ancients had learned that the motion of shadows could reveal the passage of time. Now, they wondered if something else, something that did not depend on the sun, might carry that same power into the dark. Thus began the search for time that could flow without sunlight, a new kind of instrument that would measure hours not by light and shadow, but by the gentle, steady motion of the elements themselves. Water would soon take the place of light. Drops would replace shadows, and the world would once again find a new way to listen to the heartbeat of time. Secrets in the sun's arc, the sundial, in all its quiet elegance, held a secret. To the untrained eye, it was a simple thing. A stick, casting a shadow. But to those who truly watched, who gave years to the patient study of light, it revealed something far more profound. The language of the heavens themselves. The sun does not move the same way each day. Its path across the sky changes with the seasons, rising higher in summer and lower in winter, leaning slightly north or south as the months drift by. To understand this pattern was to unlock one of the great truths of existence, that the earth, that is solid beneath our feet, is always turning, always tilting, always in graceful motion. Long before anyone spoke of orbits or axes, ancient astronomers had already discovered this truth, not through machines, but through shadow. They observed how the length and angle of the midday shadow changed as the year passed. In summer, the sun stood tall, and shadows were short. In winter, the sun hung low, and shadows stretched long across the earth like reaching fingers. By marking these subtle differences on stones or temple floors, they built not only sundials, but calendars of light. Each line drawn in the sand, each notch on a pillar, became part of a cosmic record, a memory of the sun's endless dance. In ancient Egypt, these markings grew into grand instruments. Obelisks, those tall, elegant spires that still stand today, were not only monuments to kings and gods, they were also immense sundials. The tip of the obelisk, touched by sunlight, cast a shadow across carefully designed courtyards. Priests could read that shadow as a message from the heavens, a signal of the hour, the season, even the approach of the solstice. At the base of these monuments, small markers of stone showed the passing hours, while the obelisk's shadow crept from one to the next, with the silent precision of the cosmos itself. The temple complex at Karnak, aligned perfectly with the rising of the midwinter sun, is one such testament, a place where architecture and astronomy met in quiet reverence. In Babylon, and later in Greece, this fascination deepened. Greek philosophers, combining observation with geometry, began to study the sundial as a mathematical problem. How could one device, fixed to the earth, tell time accurately across the seasons? The answer, they discovered, lay in the angle of the gnomon, that slender rod whose shadow marked the dial. It was not enough to simply stand the rod upright. It had to be tilted a line to point toward the north, matching the angle of the Earth's axis. Only then would the shadow fall consistently, marking equal hours throughout the year. This discovery was a quiet triumph. It meant that the sundial was not merely a passive receiver of sunlight. It was a map of the Earth's relationship with the sky. Each line carved on its surface was a trace of our planet's tilt and motion, an invisible geometry made visible by light. In the city of Alexandria, scholars at the Great Library would later refine these designs even further. They compared sundials from different latitudes, from the hot sands of Nubia to the cool hills of Macedonia, and found that each required a unique calibration. The dial that told true time in one land would lie in another. It was an astonishing realization. Time, as the sun measured it, was different across the world. The hours in Athens did not match those in Thebes or in Babylon. The sundial revealed that time was not universal. It was local, bound to the turning of the earth and the height of the sun above each horizon. And so, what began as a shadow on the ground became a philosophy. Time, like life, could not be separated from place. Even the way shadows moved, slow in the morning, hurried at noon, languid again, toward dusk, carried lessons. Farmers learned to read these patterns as guides for their day. Builders studied them to align walls and monuments. Priests read them as divine rhythms, signs that the gods themselves moved through predictable paths. In the lands of Greece and Rome, sundials began to appear in gardens, marketplaces, and public courtyards. Some were small enough to rest in a traveler's hand, a portable piece of the sky. Others were grand and carved from marble, placed before temples where citizens could gather to watch the day unfold. Each one was both a tool and a meditation. But even as they admired their precision, the ancients could not ignore a certain mystery. At times, the shadow moved faster or slower than expected. At the same hour each day, the sun's position seemed just slightly off. They didn't yet know of the Earth's elliptical orbit or its axial tilt. Those ideas would come thousands of years later. But they sensed that time itself was elastic, that even the heavens breathed in a slow rhythm. The equation of time, as we call it now, was already felt in their bones. Some ancient scholars adjusted their dials to account for this. They divided daylight into 12 equal parts hours, though their length changed with the season. Summer hours were long, winter hours were short. To them, this was natural. The world's time was meant to expand and contract, to follow the flow of the sun, not the will of man. That understanding feels distant to us now, in our regimented world of identical hours and exact minutes. But to the ancients, it was the most natural thing imaginable. Time was alive, breathing like a living thing, sometimes quick and sometimes slow, just as all life does. And so, the sundial was not only a clock, it was a teacher. It showed that light could be measured, but also that perfection was an illusion. Each day was unique. Each shadow was its own moment, never to be repeated. In that lesson lies something profound. The ancients lived in tune with imperfection. They did not expect each hour to mirror the last. The passage of time was not a straight line, but a curve, bending softly with the seasons, shaped by the sky. To stand before a sundial was to be reminded that one's life, too, follows such arcs, moments of brightness and moments of shade, all parts of the same grand pattern. And when the sun dipped below the horizon, when the shadow dissolved into dusk, people did not see that as an end. It was merely a pause, a breathing space, before the next day as light would draw the arc anew. The sundial slept at night, and with it, the world seemed to rest. But the hunger to understand did not rest. If shadows could mark the passing of day, what could measure the hours of darkness? Somewhere, perhaps in Egypt or Babylon, someone watched a drop of water fall from a bowl, steady, rhythmic, never hurried, never late. And perhaps, in that gentle dripping, they heard the same quiet voice that once spoke through the sun's shadow. Time, it seemed, could also be found in the patience of water. The shadow had taught them much, but the sun would soon share its wisdom with another element. The next stage of timekeeping was waiting one that would flow quietly through the night, tracing hours not in light, but in the eternal rhythm of falling drops. limitations beneath the sundial was a masterpiece of simplicity. Sunlight, shadow, and stone, working together to turn the movement of the heavens into something human, something understandable. Yet for all its beauty, it lived only half a life. Its voice faded with the setting sun. As the sky deepened into twilight, the dial grew silent. The shadow that once stretched and curved across the face of time disappeared into the dark, and with it, the hours became unknowable. The ancients could no longer see time passing, they could only feel it. The night was timeless, and in that endless dark, time itself seemed to rest. But human curiosity never rests for long. The same minds that once studied the sun's path now turned their gaze toward the problem the sundial could not solve: how to measure time when the light was gone. Every great invention carries within it the seed of its own limitations. The sundial's flaw was as clear as the sun itself. It could not speak without light. On cloudy days, its shadow vanished completely. And even at noon, the play of the seasons could distort its reading. The ancients accepted these imperfections with patience. But they also began to wonder, could there be another way? A method that would not depend on the kindness of the weather or the rising and setting of the sun. Something steady, constant, silent, yet fightful. For now, though, they still lived by light. And those who used the sundial learned to read its moods as one might read the temperament of a friend. A farmer knew that when the winter sun hung low, his day would be short. A merchant, watching the noon shadow lean toward evening, knew when to close his market stall. A priest, standing in the courtyard of a temple, could tell by the slow retreat of the shadow that it was time for the afternoon offering. Time was not exact, but it was felt. It flowed through daily life like a gentle wind, sometimes strong, sometimes faint, always moving. Yet, beneath that calm rhythm, something remarkable was changing. As sundials spread across the ancient world, from Egypt to Greece, from Babylon to Rome, people began to sense time differently. It was no longer just the cycle of day and night, or the passing of seasons. It was something measurable, something that could be divided and shared. The sundial, for all its silence, had given birth to a new awareness, that time could belong to everyone, not just the gods. But with that gift came new restlessness. For the first time, people began to feel the absence of time when the shadow disappeared. The night, once peaceful, became a space of uncertainty. Without a way to measure its hours, people wondered how much of it had passed, how long they had slept, or prayed, or waited. A Roma writer once joked that sundials ruined life's simplicity. Before them, he said, people had eaten when hungry and rested when tired. Now, they looked anxiously at the dial, chasing the shadow's movement as if their lives depended on it. The humor carried a truth. Humanity had begun its long relationship with the tyranny of time. Still, most saw beauty, not burden, in the sundial's discipline. Each morning, the return of the shadow was a promise, the renewal of order and purpose. Each evening, its disappearance was a gentle reminder that rest was part of the same rhythm. In the high places of Greece, in courtyards of polished marble, the sundial was treated almost as a living thing. Scholars would gather around it, tracing its shadow with their fingers, discussing philosophy as the day unfolded. The slow movement of that line was like the heartbeat of the world itself, marking the steady passage of thought and life. But even they knew its limits. On a foggy morning, the dial offered no guidance. On stormy days, its voice was silent. At night, when the moon rose pale and uncertain, there was only guessing. In lands where clouds often hid the sun, in the valleys of Mesopotamia, or the misty islands of early Europe, the sundial was less a clock and more a symbol. It represented the desire to understand the heavens, even when the heavens refused to reveal themselves. So, the ancients turned their eyes downward. If light could not always be trusted, perhaps water could. They had seen water flow, constant and patient. They had watched it drip, drop by drop, in perfect rhythm, long after the sun had gone. It seemed to possess the very quality they were searching for: steadiness. The limitations of the sundial were not failures. They were invitations. Every time the sky darkened and the dial fell silent, it whispered a challenge. Find another way. And so they did. somewhere in the stillness of night, perhaps inside a temple or an astronomer's chamber, a bowl of water stood. A tiny hole had been made at its base, just enough to let a slow, steady trickle escape. Beneath it, another vessel collected the falling drops. Each drop, soft and measured, marked a moment. Each sound, faint but sure, was like a heartbeat echoing in the darkness. The first water clock, the clepsydra, was born. It would soon become the world's new timekeeper, capable of measuring hours even when the sun was gone. Its rhythm would guide priests in midnight rituals, judges in long deliberations, and astronomers in their study of the stars. But in this moment, under the fading light of the ancient world, the sundial still stood, noble, patient, and true. It had given humanity a way to see time, to understand the sun's great cycle, to recognize that every day carried its own perfect pattern of light and shade. And though its power ended with dusk, its spirit continued in every invention that followed. For all future clocks, no matter how advanced, still carry within them a little of that first shadow, the memory of the sun's voice. So when we think of the sundial's limitations, we might also think of its grace. It taught us to look up, to notice, to measure not just with instruments, but with wonder. Its silence beneath the clouds, its rest through the night, were not failures. They were reminders that time itself is not always meant to be counted, but sometimes simply felt. And in that soft silence, when the sun sank below the horizon and the last shadow faded from stone, humanity waited, listening, as it always had, for the next whisper from the universe, the dripping of time, the water clock clepsydra. In the quiet hours, when the sun withdrew and the shadow vanished from the dial, the ancients found themselves staring into the patient darkness, a space unmeasured, yet full of rhythm. Somewhere, a faint sound echoed. Drop, drop, drop. It was steady, gentle, alive, the heartbeat of water. And from that sound, humanity learned to measure the passing of time again. The water clock, the clepsydra, was born from the desire to capture time without light. It was both humble and extraordinary, a vessel that let water escape at a slow, constant passe while another vessel received it below. Each drop was a moment, each measure of water, an hour. No sun, no shadow, just motion and patience. Long before mechanical gears or ticking pendulums, the clepsydra spoke in whispers. It was the first clock that worked through the night, unbothered by clouds or storms. It did not need the heavens. It only needed gravity and the steady rhythm of flowing water. In ancient Egypt, priests used such clocks within the silent chambers of temples. When the world outside lay sleeping beneath the stars, the priests watched the drops fall, counting the sacred hours for midnight rituals. By torchlight, the faint gleam of bronze or stone revealed markings inside the vessel. Careful lines carved to show how much time had passed as the water sank lower and lower. To them, the water was alive. It flowed like the Nile itself, marking not just the movement of time, but the flow of the divine. The Greeks, fascinated by knowledge and precision, took the clepsydra and refined it. They adjusted the width of the hole to ensure the water dripped evenly. They noticed that water flowed faster when the vessel was full, and slower when it was nearly empty. So they shaped containers to balance the pressure. It became not merely a clock, but a marvel of early physics. In Athens, judges used the clepsydra to limit speeches in the law courts. When the water ran out, the speaker's time was done. And so, time became not only a cosmic measure, but a tool of human order. Justice itself was timed by the dripping of water. In distant Babylon, the same principle was used for the study of stars. Astronomers kept vigil through long nights, watching constellations rise and fall while listening to the faint rhythm of the clepsydra. Each drop marked the heavens' slow rotation. By dawn, they could predict when the stars would next return, how long the night had lasted, and where the moon would appear in its cycle. It is a beautiful thought that time itself, invisible and infinite, could be heard as a simple drop of water in a clay bowl. In China, the clepsydra grew to monumental size. Engineers created towers filled with cascading water and mechanical figures that moved with its flow. Bronze dragons spat streams into basins. Bells chimed to mark the hours. Carved men raised flags to signal each division of time. These were not just devices, they were performances. Great works of art that united science and beauty. To stand before one must have been like standing before a living machine. A waterfall of time, where every drop was measured, and every hour announced by music. The Persians, too, used water clocks in their observatories and gardens. For them, the clepsydra symbolized harmony, a reminder that time, like water, was meant to flow, not to be grasped. In some palaces, delicate fountains were designed not merely for beauty, but for rhythm, the steady dripping, echoing the slow breathing of the world. What began as necessity to know the hour when the sun was gone became an art, a philosophy, a way of listening to the universe. And yet, the clepsydra had its own imperfections. Temperature could change the flow. Water could freeze in the cold or evaporate in the heat. Small flaws in the whole could alter the pace. It was not a machine of exactness, but of elegance. Its rhythm was organic, alive, and in that, it reflected the nature of the world itself. The ancients did not demand precision as we do today. They sought harmony, to live in rhythm with nature rather than in defiance of it. A drop might come a little early, a little late, but still, the day moved as it should. For them, time was not something to conquer, it was something to understand. As centuries passed, the clepsydra evolved. The Greeks added floats and pointers, allowing time to be read more easily. The Romans placed them in their public baths and gardens, where the sound of dripping water became part of the music of the city. In India, astrologers built brasgatis, small, calibrated bowls that sank in a fixed number of minutes. When the bowl filled and slipped beneath the surface, an assistant would note the time, lift it out, and begin again. The world had entered a new rhythm. No longer tied only to the light of the sun, humanity could now measure the hidden hours of night. Work, study, and ritual could continue beyond the boundaries of day. The clepsydra changed how people thought about time from something seen to something heard. It introduced the idea that time could flow continuously, independent of the heavens, guided only by human design. If the sundial taught us to look upward, the clepsydra taught us to listen inward, to the soft, steady pulse of existence. And just as the sundial's shadow had once inspired wonder, the drip of water inspired imagination. Each drop that fell was a moment lost, but also a promise renewed, a quiet reminder that the passing of time was the rhythm of life itself. The invention of the water clock did not silence the beauty of the sundial. It expanded Italiano. Together, they formed the first duet in the long symphony of timekeeping. Light and water, shadow and sound, day and night. Even now, in the age of glowing screens and digital seconds, there is something profoundly calming in that ancient rhythm. The soft drip of water into a waiting bowl, marking the endless, unhurried heartbeat of the world. And so, from the depths of antiquity, time continued to flow not only in rivers and stars, but through every invention that followed. Each drop carried us forward, from the temples of Egypt to the marble courts of Athens, to the towers of China, until one day, humanity would no longer be content merely to let time flow. We would begin to capture it. The next great step was already forming in the minds of those who studied the skies, the builders of observatories, who sought not just to measure the hours, but to chart the very rhythm of the universe itself. When water became mathematics, the water clock had begun as a simple marvel, a bowl, a hole, and a slow, steady drip. But in the centuries that followed, that gentle rhythm began to transform. What was once a whisper of nature became a language of numbers. The ancients were no longer content merely to watch time pass. They wanted to understand it, to measure it, refine it, and master it. The flowing of water, once symbolic and sacred, became the earliest form of applied mathematics. In the workshops of Greece and Egypt, craftsmen and scholars worked together, carving and calibrating their vessels with increasing precision. They experimented with angles, with pressure, with flow. They learned that time could be tuned, just as a musician tunes an instrument. It was in these moments that the clepsydra, the humble water clock, became more than a curiosity. It became a laboratory of physics, a teacher of proportion and geometry. When an Athenian engineer adjusted the width of a hole by a fraction of a grain's thickness, he was not just fixing a leak, he was defining an early equation of flow. When a Babylonian astronomer watched water rise inside a receiving bowl and compared it to the height of a star above the horizon, he was performing the first synchronization of heaven and earth. And in that quiet precision, the ancients began to hear something new, a rhythm not of nature, but of reason. In Greece, philosophers such as Plato and Aristotle used the clepsydra as a symbol in their teachings, a metaphor for the measured balance of existence. The steady drip represented order, its loss, chaos. In their world, time was no longer only divine. It was mechanical, mathematical, a mirror of the mind itself. Inside the courts of Athens, justice was metered by water. When an orator stood before the people, a servant would open the tap of the clepsydra. As the water began to flow, the speaker's time began to drain away. When the vessel emptied, the speech was done, whether or not the argument was complete. Those dripping minutes taught discipline. Time, for the first time, had rules. In the temples of Egypt, the same device took on a different kind of precision. Priests used elaborately decorated water clocks, etched with star maps and hieroglyphs, to mark the hours of night rituals. Each line along the vessel was aligned to the rising of a particular constellation. As the water fell, time and starlight moved in harmony. It was more than science. It was devotion turned mechanical, and in Babylon, the merging of astronomy and mathematics found a new form. Observers of the night sky began timing the movements of planets by the clepsydra's steady drip. Their calculations, though made in silence by lamplight thousands of years ago, would later echo in the works of scholars across ages. The logic of those early clocks flowed forward into calendars, into geometry, and ultimately into the sciences that shaped our modern world. The evolution of the water clock also inspired invention beyond measure. Engineers designed devices where floating markers rose with the level of water, pointing to inscriptions of hours carved on columns. Some even used gears and pulleys, so that statues could move as time advanced, an early echo of automation. Centuries before mechanical clocks were born, in China, the refinement reached astonishing beauty. The great astronomer and engineer Su Song, in the 11th century, would later design a towering water-driven astronomical clock, powered by a continuous flow of water and regulated by an early escapement system. Centuries before Europe's mechanical revolution. But even before his time, Chinese scholars had already mastered the delicate balance of flow and force. Their clepsydras were not simply containers. They were symphonies of motion. Time, once fluid and unpredictable, had become a thing that could be regulated. It could be repeated, observed, tested. It was, in essence, becoming science. And with that transformation came a profound change in human thought. The ancients began to believe that if time itself could be measured, then so could the rest of the universe. The dripping of water was not just marking the hours. It was whispering that the cosmos followed laws, patterns, and proportions. In those early laboratories of clay and bronze, the rhythm of civilization found its tempo. Farmers could now organize irrigation by timed intervals. Builders could coordinate labor according to predictable hours. Priests could synchronize ceremonies across distant temples. The pulse of time had entered every aspect of life, binding people not only to the heavens, but to one another. The water clock had become the first great bridge between emotion and logic, between wonder and precision. And perhaps that is why it endured for so long. It satisfied both sides of the human spirit. The dreamer who listened to the sound of water falling in darkness, and the thinker who saw in that rhythm a formula waiting to be discovered. But the flow of water, however steady, could not hold forever. Even as it became more refined, a new hunger was growing. A desire to reach beyond the vessel, beyond the drip, and into the sky itself. Humanity had learned to measure the hours of the day, and even of the night. But now, they wanted to understand why time moved as it did. They turned their eyes once again to the heavens, to the stars that had inspired the first sundials, to the constellations that guided the priests and farmers. And there, in the endless dome of the sky, they would build their next great instrument. The observatory, eyes to the heavens, astronomical observatories long before telescopes or mechanical clocks, before calendars were carved in stone or written on parchment, humanity lifted its gaze to the night sky. The heavens were the first clock, vast, silent, eternal. Every glimmering star, every moonrise, every slow drift of constellations across the horizon marked a pattern, a rhythm. And through that rhythm, ancient people learned to understand time itself. The earliest observatories were not towers of glass and metal, but temples of stone and earth. They were built by hands, guided by wonder circles, pyramids, and terraces, shaped not only for worship, but for watching. On mist-covered plains, great stones stood in solemn silence, raised by forgotten builders who studied the sky. In places like Stonehenge, the rising sun of midsummer struck perfectly through gaps in its massive pillars. The alignment was no accident. It was a message. The heavens have order, and so must we. Across the oceans, on the ziggurats of Mesopotamia, priests climbed spiraling stairways to observe the stars, night after night. They recorded the movements of Venus, of Jupiter, of the moon's gentle phases. These early astronomers saw the sky not as chaos, but as an immense turning wheel, a celestial mechanism whose every motion could be predicted and measured. They built their knowledge into architecture. The high terraces of Babylon, Timekeeping, the legendary tower of heaven and earth, served not only as a temple, but as a platform for watching the night unfold. The priest astronomers, wrapped in robes of linen and dusted with the faint glow of oil lamps, marked the hours by the stars rising and setting. Their eyes were the instruments, their minds the first calculators. In the valleys of Egypt, the builders of temples also turned their gaze skyward. At Karnak, at Abu Simbel, and in countless sanctuaries along the Nile, sunlight pierced the inner chambers on only a few sacred days of the year. The solstices and those golden beams did not simply illuminate statues of gods. They marked the balance of seasons, the promise of flood and harvest. Each shaft of light was time made visible. Far to the east, in China, astronomers mapped the skies from the tops of earthen towers. They built enormous sighting tubes and set bronze instruments aligned to the celestial poles. The emperor's astronomer, standing in stillness beneath the Milky Way, measured not minutes or seconds, but the turning of ages. For, in their belief, heaven's order reflected the emperor as virtue. To keep the calendar was to keep the world in balance, and in the high plateaus of Mesoamerica, the Maya built observatories of their own. Circular temples like El Caracol rose above the jungles, their windows angled perfectly to frame the planet Venus, the bright morning star they called Chek. To them, each appearance of Venus foretold war, renewal, or peace. Time was divine, and the stars were its messengers. In every civilization, from the frozen mists of northern Europe to the burning sands of the Near East, humanity shared the same impulse, to look upward and understand. The sky was both mystery and map. When the ancients saw the moon wax and wane, they learned the rhythm of months. When they traced the sun its a yearly path, they discovered the seasons. When they watched the stars rise earlier each night, they found the key to measuring years. But their observatories were not merely scientific. They were sacred. Structure, from the simplest stone circle to the grandest temple, stood as a bridge between earth and eternity. Time, they believed, was the breath of the gods, moving through the heavens and reflected in the cycles of nature. In those ancient nights, when torches flickered and constellations wheeled overhead, astronomers worked in silence, their records scratched onto clay or painted on walls. They were keepers of rhythm, guardians of the cosmic pulse. Their task was not to control time, but to listen to it. And listen they did. They heard time in the movement of shadows across temple floors, in the rising arc of Orion, in the disappearance of the Pleiades before dawn. Each motion was a syllable in a celestial language, one that only patience could translate. Through these early observatories, humanity learned that time was not random. It had symmetry, repetition, harmony. The heavens moved in patterns, and so life on earth should follow those same patterns, in planting, in ritual, in celebration. The megaliths, ziggurats, and pyramids were all part of one silent conversation between sky and stone. And though the builders of each lived thousands of miles apart, they were united by a shared truth: that time, to be understood, must be observed. Their legacy endures even now. The alignments they crafted thousands of years ago still work. At dawn on the solstice, the sunlight still finds its way through the stones at Stonehenge. At Abu Simbel, it still touches the statue of Ramses, as it did in the age of pharaohs. The ziggurats of Babylon may have crumbled, but their idea that time can be measured by the heavens has never faded. Those ancient watchers may not have had clocks, but they had something even greater: patience. They waited for the stars to move, for the moon to return, for the dawn to prove what they had recorded the night before. And in that waiting, they found truth. The observatory was humanity's first laboratory of the infinite, built not of metal and glass, but of faith and stone, and from those platforms of skyward dreams. The great calendar makers of the world would soon emerge, transforming observation into order, and rhythm into rule. The calendar and the cosmos, the night sky, was a scroll, and the ancients learned to read it. Every star was a mark, every rising sun a turning page. And in that celestial book, they found not only beauty, but instruction, a way to live, to sow, to celebrate, to survive. From the observatories of stone and ziggurat, from the high terraces and temple courts, a new kind of wisdom took form: the calendar. It was not written in ink, nor bound in parchment. It was written in light. Each sunrise and each moonrise marked a note in the cosmic rhythm that guided the lives of all who watched. The earliest calendars were born not from ambition, but from necessity. To plant too early was to risk frost. To plant too late was to starve. So farmers looked upward to the return of certain stars that heralded the coming of rain, or the swelling of rivers. In Egypt, when the brilliant star Sirius Suthis rose just before dawn, the people knew that the Nile would soon flood. Its arrival was the heartbeat of life itself, bringing both destruction and renewal. From that sign in the sky, the Egyptians built one of the earliest solar calendars, a cycle of 365 days, divided into months, weeks, and sacred festivals. Time was no longer simply observed. It was organized. In Babylon, astronomers recorded the moon's every phase, its waxing crescents and fading shadows, and crafted a lunar calendar. They named each month for celestial omens, blending science with divination. To them, time was not just a measurement. It was a prophecy written in the stars. The Chinese, watching both sun and moon, built calendars of astonishing accuracy. They noted the solstices, the equinoxes, and the subtle shifts of seasons with a precision that linked heaven's motion to the empire's fate. The emperor himself was called the Son of Heaven, and to rule justly. He had to keep the calendar correct, for a world out of sync with the cosmos was a world out of harmony. To the Maya in the far west, the stars spoke in sacred numbers. Their astronomer priests charted the movements of Venus and wove them into cycles of days that repeated endlessly. 260, 365, 584. To them, time was not a line, but a circle, an eternal dance of creation and destruction. Each calendar day carried its own spirit, its own destiny. Life itself was bound to the clockwork of the heavens. In every culture, the same truth echoed. The sky ruled the earth. Festivals bloomed in its rhythm. Harvests timed by the solstice, prayers by the moon's return, processions by the first gleam of a certain star. Even sleep and waking, labor and rest were molded by this celestial order. The calendar became the soul of civilization. It told the people when to gather, when to sow, when to worship. It gave meaning to the endless passage of days, turning chaos into pattern, motion into memory. But beneath the surface of this growing order was something deeply human: the longing to belong to time, to find one's place within the turning of the world. In temples across the ancient Near East, priests kept watch with water clocks and star charts, adjusting calendars when the heavens drifted from their marks. They understood that even the sky, perfect as it seemed, required correction that time itself was a dialogue between nature and human hands. And so, calendars evolved, from lunar to solar, from local to universal. The Babylonians added intercalary months to balance the seasons. The Egyptians divided the year into 12 equal parts. The Greeks, seeking harmony between moon and sun, created the Metonic cycle, a 19-year rhythm that reconciled the heavens to clocks. Each culture left its imprint on the fabric of time, a legacy still carried in our modern calendars today. Yet, for all their precision, these early systems carried a touch of the sacred. A calendar was not merely a chart of days. It was a reflection of cosmic order. To live by it was to live in tune with the gods. When the solstice came, and the longest night yielded to dawn, people saw not just the return of light, but the renewal of hope. When the full moon shone above the harvest fields, it was more than a marker of the month. It was a reminder that all things move in cycles, that endings are beginnings, that time is both loss and promise. Across the ancient world, calendars united communities under the same sky. From the farmers of the Nile to the scribes of Babylon, from the priests of Xi'an to the astronomers of the Yucatan, all were guided by the same rhythm, though they gave it different names. And in that shared rhythm lay civilization's heartbeat, the silent agreement that time could be trusted, that the stars would return, and that tomorrow would follow today. The calendar, then, was not merely a tool. It was a philosophy, a bridge between humanity and the cosmos. It taught that order could emerge from mystery, and that the vastness of the sky could be understood not by conquering it, but by listening. From those ancient reckonings of light and shadow, the world entered a new age, one where time itself would organize the work of nations, the labor of builders, and the dreams of kings. And so, as the stars continued to wheel above, humanity looked downward again, to the earth, to the city, to the rising monuments that would soon require time not only to mark, but to command. The rhythm of the heavens was about to become the rhythm of civilization itself, the builder's rhythm. When the stars had given humankind the gift of order, the earth began to echo it. The same rhythm that moved the heavens now guided the builders of stone, the diggers of canals, the dreamers of monuments. Time, once a mystery of the sky, became the heartbeat of civilization. It was in the steady swing of the mason's hammer, in the measured pull of ropes that raised colossal stones, in the march of workers as they followed the shadow of the sundial. Every brick, every beam, every carbon, all were placed in obedience to the sun's slow passage and the priestess counting of hours. In ancient Egypt, where the Nile marked the seasons, the building of the pyramids was a symphony of time. Before dawn, a horn sounded. The crews gathered, divided by rank and task, each group assigned a span of work, measured by the clepsydra, drip, or the movement of light. Upon the temple walls, the foremen were not simply masters of labor, they were keepers of rhythm. When the sun reached a certain height, the order was called rest. When the shadow reached another line, thus, the pyramid rose not by force alone, but by the harmony of time and motion. The ancients had learned that order, not chaos, was the true strength of man. In Mesopotamia, builders used time to tame water. The Euphrates and Tigris, once wild and unpredictable, were bound by canals and levees constructed through precisely timed labor. The work could not begin when the floods were high, nor end before the soil hardened. Every stage followed the calendar's guidance, the moon for irrigation, the solstice for harvest. Temples and ziggurats rose under the same watch, aligned with stars whose risings marked the proper moment to lay their foundations. Even in faraway China, the emperor's great projects, walls, palaces, and cities were measured not only by the span of distance, but by the rhythm of celestial time. Court astronomers determined the auspicious day to begin construction, believing that the heavens must approve every earthly act. When the Nomon's shadow shortened, signaling midday, workers knew when to eat, when to pray, when to resume. Thus, time became architecture. Each civilization built not only with stone, but with seconds, not only with hands, but with hours. In Greece, as cities grew and markets flourished, the measurement of time turned civic. Public sundials stood in the agora, visible to all, marking the division of day into 12 parts. Bells or heralds called the people to assembly or judgment, each moment appointed by the movement of the sun. Time had become the invisible ruler of the polis fair, impartial and universal. And yet, there was artistry in this order. Temples were aligned to capture light at precise moments, a golden beam illuminating the statue of a god only once each year, when the festival dawned. Such architecture was not coincidence. It was celestial choreography, stone moving in rhythm with the stars. In the Indus Valley, long before mechanical clocks, cities like Mohenjo-daro were laid out on perfect grids, a silent testament to planned hours and measured effort. The alignment of streets, the timing of floods, the coordination of trade all spoke of a people who had learned that progress was born not from haste, but harmony. And in the far Andes, the Inca would later echo this wisdom, carving their temples and terraces in sync with the sun's path, each solstice casting its light upon sacred stones. Though oceans apart, these civilizations shared one truth. Time was the first architect. For every grand vision, every wall, every road, every monument required not only strength and skill, but patience. The ancients built as the cosmos built, slowly, precisely, eternally. Their constructions were more than structures. They were calendars in stone. The temple at Abu Simbel that greets the dawn only twice a year, the ziggurat of your rising tier upon tier toward the heavens it measured. The pyramids aligned to the cardinal stars, their edges sharper than centuries themselves. Even the humblest laborer knew that his day was a note in a greater symphony, his hour a beat in the timeless rhythm of creation. And when dusk fell, and the shadows grew long again across the scaffolds and sands, the builders would rest, watching the first stars appear. They saw in those lights not mere beauty, but confirmation that their day's work, measured and complete, mirrored the eternal order above. Thus, civilization learned the great secret, that time, once wild and wandering, could be harnessed, not caged, but guided, that through rhythm, even stone could sing. And in this harmony between labor and light, between man and sun, a new age dawned, an age where time no longer simply told the hours, but shaped destiny itself. Time and the people, as the great monuments rose and empires stretched their borders. Time began to descend from the heavens and enter the streets. It no longer belonged only to priests and builders, but to Ebrion, two merchants in the markets, two farmers in the fields, two mothers marking the hours by the fading light through their doors. For the first time, humanity began to live by the clock of society. In ancient cities, the rhythm of the day was no longer a mystery of nature, but a pattern of sound and ceremony. At sunrise, the temple bells or horns would call people to labor. At midday, smoke rose from hearths as workers rested. And at sunset, as the light withdrew from the city walls, the world slowed once again into prayer, supper, and song. This shared rhythm united the people more surely than laws or armies ever could. For in every heart, there beat the same awareness that the day was passing, and each hour had its appointed meaning. In Egypt, the priests of Ra proclaimed the hours through chants. Their songs echoed through the courtyards, mocking each division of light and shadow. It was said that to ignore the rhythm of the temple was to fall out of harmony with the cosmos itself. Time, once divine, had become domestic, and in that transformation, civilization found its order. In Mesopotamia, time found its way into the marketplace. There, traders measured not only weight and grain, but duration, how long a journey would take, when a caravan should depart, or how many days before goods would spoil. Contracts began to include time itself. Delivery within 10 days, payment by the next moon, festival trade only after harvest. Time had become currency, invisible, yet powerful. The Greeks gave it names. They called the fleeting, living moment kairos. The right time and the steady, measured flow. To them, time had moods, purposes, and spirit. A wise man knew not only how to count time, but when to act within it. In the Roman world, time became discipline. The empire ran on schedules, legions marched by precise intervals, baths opened, and closed with the sun. Markets rang with the clamor of the horologium, great sundials that ruled the day. Even leisure had its hour. A Roma might say, "I have no time," not as lament, but as truth. For the empire itself was a machine of ours. In the East, the Chinese took a gentler view. Time was harmony, not command. Their calendars balanced yin and yang, the dark and the light, the waxing and the waning. Festivals followed the lunar rhythm, and work was guided by the natural world's quiet logic. To live rightly was to live in tune, neither rushing the seasons, nor resisting them. And among the people, across lands and centuries, time shaped identity. Children learned to mark the day not by hours, but by sounds. The call of the rooster, the toll of the bell, the fading of shadows. A craftsman knew his shift by the sunbeam's reach upon his bench. A shepherd timed his flocks by the length of the afternoon. Even those who could not read the stars had learned to read their own lives as calendars. Each day a verse, each season a turning page. But time also brought a new awareness, and with it, a quiet anxiety. For to measure something is to know it can be lost. When days were named and counted, they could slip away. When hours were defined, they could vanish. The ancients began to sense the preciousness of the present, the fleeting nature of each dawn. Poets wrote of time as a river, endless, unstoppable, carrying all things away. Philosophers pondered whether man was the keeper of time or its captive. And in the gentle hush of evening, when the lamps were lit and the last echoes of labor faded, people looked to the stars and felt both comfort and longing. The same constellations that once told kings when to build now told common souls when to rest. Time had become universal. Yet for all its order, it remained deeply human, woven into song, faith, and daily ritual. It governed work and worship, lao and los, and gave rhythm to existence itself. From the hum of markets to the silence of temples, every breath, every motion, was part of the great choreography of civilization. A dance not of chaos, but of shared heartbeat. And as the people lived and died by its measure, they built something invisible yet enduring, a sense of belonging to the flow of eternity. Because time, in its purest form, is not a thing to be owned, but a song to be lived within. And so, while priests still watched the heavens and kings still built monuments, the real keepers of time became the people themselves, the bakers, the farmers, the sailors, and the mothers who waited for the return of light. The rhythm of civilization had found its pulse. The world had learned to breathe in hours. Celestial guidance in the fields before cities crowded the horizon. The true clock of humanity lay in the open fields, there, beneath the endless sky. The farmer and the priest stood side by side, one with his hands in the earth, the other with his eyes on the stars. Together, they learned that heaven and harvest were bound by the same rhythm. Each dawn was a lesson, each season a verse. The sky whispered when to sow and when to reap, when to call the rains, and when to let the land rest. It was the first collaboration between science and faith, a union of observation and reverence. In Egypt, the farmers lived by the Nile's pulse. When the star Sirius returned to the dawn sky, they knew the floods were near. Temples announced the news, marking the years turning with sacred rituals. Priests measured the river Esrise with carved stone pillars, the Nilometers, and their readings foretold the fate of harvests. Too much water meant ruin. Too little meant famine. But when the balance was right, Egypt bloomed like a green ribbon through the desert, the living proof that time, properly measured, could feed a civilization. In Mesopotamia, the same dance unfolded between the Tigris and Euphrates. Astronomer priests kept records of moon phases and the return of certain constellations. They learned that the appearance of Taurus marked the time for planting barley, while Scorpio signaled harvest's end. What began as faith became calculation. What began as ritual became calendar. The heavens were their almanac, and the stars their scripture. To the east, in the river valleys of China, the emperor's astronomers charted solstices with precision unmatched in their age. They watched for subtle shifts in sunlight, noting the day when shadows were shortest or longest, the great hinge points of the year. From these, They crafted agricultural guides that governed planting and ceremony alike. Every farmer, from the imperial estates to distant villages, lived by the decree of the stars. In India, the rhythm was sacred. The Vedic priests read the skies to time the rains of monsoon and the festivals of renewal. Constellations were not only signs of season but living deities, watchers of the world's order. Agriculture and astrology were not separate crafts, but one continuum of cosmic understanding. Each furrow drawn through the soil echoed the movement of the heavens above. And far to the west, the Mayans and Aztecs carved calendars of astonishing accuracy. They knew that the planet Venus governed cycles of fertility and growth. Their temples aligned to the rising and setting of the sun, casting sacred shadows across fields at the turning of the seasons. In these shadows, farmers read their future, a dialogue between stone and sky. Across the world, the same truth prevailed. Without time, there could be no harvest. The farmer was not merely a worker of soil, but a listener, attuned to the murmurs of light, the pulse of rain, the patience of waiting. In this harmony of heaven and earth, time was not a number, it was nourishment. It gave rhythm to labor and dignity to patience. The first harvest festivals were acts of gratitude, not for abundance alone, but for the gift of order. When the moon rose full and round over the ripe fields, people danced and sang to the heavens that had guided them true. But time, as it always does, brought both grace and challenge. When the skies failed, when stars disappeared behind clouds, the people turned to their priests in fear. The same celestial cycles that once promised stability now seemed capricious. The flood delayed, the rains gone astray. To calm these uncertainties, rituals grew elaborate, prayers longer, and observatories taller. Humanity sought not only to read the heavens, but to persuade them. Yet in the stillness between storms, there was wisdom. The ancients understood that time could not be rushed. A seed cannot be hurried into bloom, nor a river forced to rise. They learned that patience was the truest form of mastery, that to live well was to live in rhythm, not resistance. The fields became mirrors of the cosmos, orderly, cyclical, eternal. Every furrow was a measure of faith, every harvest a celebration of returning light. The farmer, in his quiet way, was a philosopher of time, teaching through his work what no clock could ever say. That life moves not in straight lines, but in circles, and that every ending is merely another beginning. Thus, in the meeting of soil and sky, humanity found not just survival, but understanding. The fields were classrooms of eternity, where each dawn offered the same ancient lesson: to listen, to wait, and to trust the turning of the world. Festivals of the sky when the harvest was gathered and the granaries full, ancient hearts turned upward in gratitude. The same heavens that once commanded their labor now invited them to rest. And so began one of humanity's oldest traditions, the marking of time through celebration. Long before the tick of clocks or the ringing of church bells, time was measured by joy, the laughter of festivals, the glow of torches, the rhythm of drums echoing beneath the stars. Each festival was a meeting point between heaven and earth, between the measured and the mysterious. In Egypt, the rising of Sirius each year brought not only the Nile's flood, but the great festival of renewal. For days, the cities glittered with offerings and songs. Priests carried sacred boats along the river, symbolizing the return of life after the long dry season. Time was not merely passing, it was reborn. In Mesopotamia, the Akitu festival marked the new year. For 12 sacred days, people reenacted the creation of the world. The king himself was stripped of his crown and humbled before the gods, only to be restored, symbolizing the renewal of order from chaos. In that ritual, time itself was cleansed, chaos defeated once more so that the year could begin anew. In Greece, the cycles of planting and harvest were celebrated through the Eleusinian mysteries, sacred rites honoring Demeter, goddess of the grain, and her daughter Persephone. Their myth, the descent into darkness and return to light, was not only a story of gods but a reflection of nature itself, the dying of the fields and their rebirth each spring. Each participant, holding a torch, walked through the night toward the dawn, a living calendar of hope. In the East, the Chinese people painted their festivals with fire and light. The Lunar New Year celebrated the turning of seasons with dance, drums, and the glow of countless lanterns. Every movement had meaning. Each step of the dragon dance echoed the serpent of time, winding through the years. Even silence held purpose. As families gathered to listen for the moment when the old year slipped away and the new one breathed its first, across India, color itself became a clock. The festival of Holi, when winter gave way to spring, turned streets into rainbows. A jubilant reminder that the cycles of life and season could be celebrated, not merely endured. Each hue flung into the air was a greeting to time, bright, brief, and beautiful. The Maya and Inca, too, filled their sacred calendars with ritual. When the sun reached its highest point, or when it turned back toward the south, priests stood in observatories of stone and called to the heavens. On Tosiday's light touched temples in perfect alignment, and the people knew the gods were present. Time itself had come to visit. Everywhere, festivals made the invisible visible. They reminded people that time was not only about labor and loss, it was also about return and renewal. The same stars that once told the farmer when to sow, now told him when to dance. And in those moments of unity, around firelight, under open sky, humanity glimpsed eternity, not as endless duration, but as repetition with purpose. Even as civilizations grew and empires rose, the spirit of the festival endured. In Rome, Saturnalia turned winter's darkness into revelry. In Persia, the festival of Nowruz celebrated the spring equinox, the balance of light and shadow. In the far north, bonfires lit the solstice, guarding against the longest night. And in every culture, the ringing of bells, the lighting of torches, the offering of bread and wine, all marked humanity's shared desire to celebrate the passage of time. Not the Fier Italiano. These festivals were not mere entertainments. They were acts of cosmic gratitude, rehearsals of the eternal story written in the sky. Each song, sung to the stars, each candle offered to the sun, was a declaration that life and time were one continuous miracle. Even now, though the modern calendar may hide the stars, we still echo those ancient joys. We mark birthdays and New Year's, solstices, and harvests, unaware that we are keeping faith with millennia of ancestors who danced beneath the same constellations. The ancients taught us that to celebrate time is to understand it, that every ending deserves a song, and every return a fire. For as long as we look up, whether to count, to worship, or simply to wonder, we remain part of the same festival of the sky. And as the last drums fade and torches dim, the people rest once more, their faces lit by starlight, their hearts aligned with heaven, and time itself smiling quietly, moving on. Trade, navigation, and the march of armies win. The stars had taught the farmers to sow. They next taught the travelers to move. From the quiet fields, humanity looked outward to the sea, to the horizon. Tutti unknown, carrying with them their newest companion, time. The same constellations that marked the seasons now marked the routes of merchants and sailors. And the same hours, once counted in temples, now counted the beating steps of soldiers on the march. Time had become not only a guide, but a strategy. In ancient Mesopotamia, traders crossing the deserts learned to follow the stars. The Great Bear, Orion, and the rising of certain planets told them to resin when the sands erased all tracks. The night sky was their map, the moon their lantern. They moved by the rhythm of the heavens, resting when Sirius rose too bright, setting out again when the dawn cooled the dunes. In this way, the first trade routes, the lifelines of civilization, were built not by stone or road, but by celestial memory. Along the Nile and across the Mediterranean, Egyptian sailors mastered time upon the waters. They learned that by watching the sun's position and the stars' reflection on the surface, they could measure distance and predict their arrival. Their journeys were timed by tides and moonlight, by the regular breath of wind and current. A missed hour could mean shipwreck, an early departure, success. Thus, navigation was not only skill, but patience, the art of waiting for the right moment in time's eternal flow. In Greece, where philosophy and practicality often walked hand in hand, Sailors and scholars alike refined these arts. They invented the gnomon for measuring the sun's altitude at sea, and the clepsydra for marking time during navigation. Astronomers charted the heavens with geometric precision, giving captains the confidence to sail beyond the sight of shore. Time became a bridge between courage and control. Trade expanded from Egypt to Crete, from Phoenicia to Carthage, all following the same cosmic rhythm. Merchants spoke in the language of the stars, knowing that when a certain constellation rose, the winds would shift, opening the season for safe travel. The heavens, once sacred, were now also commercial. A celestial marketplace that dictated the rhythm of wealth itself. In the east, the Silk Road stretched like a great artery through mountains and deserts. Caravans moved in disciplined cadence, days marked by sunrise, nights by constellations. At Ashur's time was measured differently. In China, by the water clock. In Persia, by the sundial. In Rome, by the hourglass. Yet all these civilizations were synchronized by the same celestial heartbeat. And where merchants went, armies followed, for even conquest required timing. In Egypt and Babylon, generals consulted astronomers before battle, seeking favorable omens in the stars. In Greece, soldiers marched to the rhythm of flutes, their pace measured by both drum and daylight. The Roman legions, unmatched in their discipline, built their empire on the mastery of time itself. Their camps were raised and dismantled according to precise schedules, their marshes calculated by distance and daylight. Each soldier's life was divided by the trumpets called dawn, meal, march, battle, rest. The empire's strength lay not only in iron, but in organization through time. Across the seas, the same principles guided exploration. In Polynesia, far from the ancient Mediterranean, navigators memorized the stars and swells. Entire oceans mapped not on parchment, but in the mind. They knew when to depart by the rising of specific constellations, when to turn by the feel of the wind. No clock ticked aboard their canoes, only the eternal pulse of nature's rhythm. Through trade and war alike, humanity learned that time was not a simple measure. It was coordination, the invisible thread binding effort and intention. A caravan could fail if 1 hour was lost. An army could be defeated if dawn came too soon. A ship could miss its destination by mistaking a single night star. And yet, amid this precision, there was wonder. The same stars that guided warriors and merchants were the same that shone above lovers and dreamers. The sky was impartial, offering its map to all who looked up with patience and humility. As the ancient world connected, east to west, land to sea, time itself became global. Calendars once local began to merge, borrowing from one another's wisdom. Babylonian astronomy shaped Greek science. Egyptian solar reckoning influenced Roman hours. Chinese observatories refined calendars that would echo for millennia. The world was learning to breathe together in measured rhythm. Trade taught cooperation. War taught discipline. And both taught that survival depended not merely on strength or wealth, but on the ability to listen to the silent clockwork of the universe. For every voyage, every march, every exchange, all moved to the same celestial beat. The sun's arc, the moon's pull, the turning of the earth itself. And those centuries would pass before humanity built mechanical clocks. In truth, they already carried time with them, in the stars above, in the steps below, and in the quiet, unbroken rhythm of their own hearts. The first global clockwork. By now, the world was awake, from Egypt's temples to China's observatories, from Greek academies to Babylon's ziggurats. Eyes everywhere turned upward, tracing the same constellations, wondering the same eternal question: how does time move? And slowly, like dawn, spreading across the horizon, an astonishing realization emerged that all civilizations were watching the same sky. Each culture had named the stars in its own tongue, yet their paths were the same. The moons, phases, the solstices, the wanderings of the planets, these rhythms were universal, indifferent to empire or creed, and though distances and deserts lay between them, humanity was, perhaps for the first time, synchronized by the cosmos itself. In Babylon, astronomer priests stood upon towering ziggurats, charting the heavens night after night. They recorded the patterns of Venus, Mars, and Jupiter with such precision that centuries later their data still astonish scholars. Their clay tablets became the first archives of time, preserving the pulse of the heavens in cuneiform marks. From these records, the Babylonians discovered the concept of the zodiac, dividing the sky into 12 parts, mapping time upon a cosmic circle. This circle would travel far, crossing cultures and ages, carried like a sacred code. To the west, the Greeks received these celestial ideas and refined them with geometry and philosophy. Pythagoras and later Hipparchus believed that the movements of the stars reflected a kind of divine harmony, a music of the spheres. Time, to them, was not merely motion, but order, an unseen rhythm binding the heavens and the soul. Their instruments grew precise, their maps more elegant, their calendars ever closer to perfection. They transformed observation into understanding. In Egypt, the priests of Heliopolis continued to measure the year by the rising of Sirius, the star whose reappearance foretold the flooding of the Nile. They aligned temples and pyramids to the sun, ensuring that stone and sunlight met in sacred precision. To build a monument was to freeze time in architecture. To watch the sunrise along a temple's axis was to witness eternity repeating. Their solar calendar, divided into 365 days, became a model for many that followed its logic, echoing across centuries into the modern year. Meanwhile, far to the east, Chinese astronomers gazed at the same constellations, though they named them differently: the azure dragon, the vermilion bird, the white tiger, the black tortoise, each marking a quadrant of heaven. They built vast observatories of bronze and stone, where gnomons cast long shadows across carved scales. From their observations came a calendar that united heaven and earth, balancing lunar and solar cycles to regulate harvests, rituals, and the mandate of heaven itself. Their records stretch back more than 3,000 years, an unbroken conversation with the sky. And between these great centers, Babylon, Egypt, Greece, India, and China, knowledge began to move like light itself. Traders and scholars carried tablets and manuscripts along caravan routes, across seas, through empires. Greek scholars learned from Babylonian astronomy. Indian mathematicians translated Greek geometry. Chinese scientists refined both into intricate calendars and armillary spheres. Ideas became migratory, and with them, the human sense of time became global. In India, the Vedic seers and later astronomers developed profound systems to track celestial cycles. Their texts, such as the Sira, described eclipses, planetary orbits, and time divisions far ahead of their age. They imagined time in cosmic scales, not just days or years, but epochs stretching millions of years, called Yuga. To them, time was not a line, but a wheel turning endlessly, without beginning or end. This spiritual dimension enriched the world's understanding of time, showing that it was not only mechanical, but mystical. In Persia and Mesopotamia, observatories became meeting points for science and faith. Zoroastrian scholars studied the stars as symbols of divine order, believing that by reading the heavens, humanity could live in harmony with truth. When Alexander's conquests united East and West, Greek astronomy met Persian and Indian knowledge, blending mathematics, philosophy, and observation into something larger than any one nation. Out of this fusion rose a quiet revolution, the first scientific, Timekeping. By the time of the Roman and Han empires, this network of exchange had created an invisible mechanism, a global clockwork driven not by gears, but by shared understanding. From the Mediterranean to the Pacific, humanity was learning to think in hours, days, and years defined by the same sky. The world was becoming coordinated. Ships departed by star, markets opened by sun, festivals aligned with solstices. Temples faced the dawn in perfect symmetry. Time was no longer local. It had become universal, and perhaps most beautiful of all. This great clock had no center and no sound. Its gears were the planets, its pendulum the earth itself, its ticking the slow turn of night into day. Every civilization, knowingly or not, had contributed a cog. Babylon's mathematics, Egypt's solar wisdom, Greece's geometry, India's cycles, China's balance. Together they had built a masterpiece that spanned the heavens, the first global clockwork, the synchronization of all human time. And even now, thousands of years later, as satellites orbit and atomic clocks hum with precision, the foundation remains the same. We still measure time by the movement of the earth beneath our feet and the stars above our heads. The ancients, in their silence and wonder, had already written the blueprint for eternity. Echoes in modern time when humanity first captured the light and shadow of time. It did not yet know what it had begun. The ancients had measured moments with the sun, counted hours in drops of water, and followed the heavens as their faithful guide. But as centuries passed, their inventions and insights began to whisper forward, carried through libraries, monasteries, and workshops, until their echoes became the heartbeat of the modern world. The story of modern time is not one of invention alone, but of memory. Each gear, each pendulum, each numbered face is a remembrance of the ancient sky, that from the ruins of Alexandria and Babylon, knowledge scattered like seeds. Greek treatises on motion, Roman engineering, and Arabic translations of Indian and Persian astronomy were gathered in the great centers of the medieval world, Baghdad, Cordoba, and Constantinople. There, scholars of many tongues studied the heavens as one language. They built upon the records of their ancestors, refining the length of the day, the tilt of the earth, and the precise path of the planets. The House of Wisdom in Baghdad became a new kind of observatory, not of stone circles, but of scrolls and minds. Here, time was calculated through algebra, observation, and imagination. Water clocks evolved into complex mechanisms that not only told the hour but celebrated its singing birds, miniature doors that opened to reveal planets in motion. These were not mere tools, but small universes, reflections of the cosmos in brass and glass. And in medieval Europe, the torch passed again. Monks in quiet monasteries listened not to birds or rivers, but to bells. Each toll marked prayer, each division of the day a rhythm for labor and rest. Time, once fluid and celestial, now began to tick in towers of stone. Early mechanical clocks emerged, intricate machines of wood and iron that transformed the flow of hours into sound. The sundial's shadow had become a chime. As centuries turned, timekeeping escaped the walls of monasteries and reached into towns and cities. Clockmakers became the new astronomers, artisans who turned the universe into motion within a casing of brass. In Italy, England, and Germany, bell towers marked not only the passage of prayer, but the pace of commerce. Markets opened by the hour, ships departed by the minute. The modern rhythm of life, ordered, measurable, precise, had begun to beat. Yet beneath this precision still lingered the wisdom of the ancients. Every clock tower faced the east, still greeting the sun, as once did the temples of Egypt. Calendars continued to honor the solstice. Easter followed the full moon, a trace of lunar time in a solar world. The mechanical and the celestial had never truly parted. They had only changed form, in the Renaissance. As telescopes turned toward the stars, the circle of knowledge closed. Galileo, observing the pendulum's swing, found rhythm where the ancients had found mystery. His discovery that time could be measured by the regular motion of nature echoed the heart of every sundial and clepsydra that had ever existed. And when the pendulum clock was born, the universe itself seemed to have lent humanity its steady pulse. From that moment, civilization began to move faster. Commerce, navigation, science, all demanded exactitude. Time became a meb, a measure, a messer. The age of exploration sailed not just on wind and wave, but on chronometers, instruments that turned the chaos of the sea into calculable moments. Longitude could be found by time, and time, once divine, now guided the ships of empire. Yet amid this precision, something ancient remained an echo beneath the ticking. We still looked to the heavens for reassurance. still marked our calendars by the turning of seasons, still felt the old awe when dawn gilded the horizon. The mechanical clock might command our days, but the cosmos still owned our nights. Every wristwatch, every tower clock, every glowing number on the screen is part of a lineage older than memory, born from the sundial's shadow, the drip of the clepsydra, the dance of the stars. We have not escaped the ancient rhythm, we have only refined its instrument. And though we may no longer stand in fields, watching Sirius rise or count time by the dripping of water, somewhere deep within us remains the same, quiet reverence, a knowing that time is not just measured, it is felt. In every tick, a heartbeat of history. In every dawn, a whisper of eternity. The ancients are still with us, in our calendars, our clocks, and in the unseen rhythm by which our lives unfold. Their echoes have not faded. They have become the pulse of the modern world. The soul of time. There comes a moment, after all the gears have turned and all the calendars have faded, when silence returns, when the ticking stops, and only breath remains slow, steady, eternal. In that silence, the ancients would have smiled, for take no time is not only motion, it is menin, from the first shadow cast upon stone to the last clock on a tower. Humanity has tried to hold time, to shape it, divide it, understand it. But perhaps the greatest wisdom lies not in measuring time, but in listening to it. The whisper of wind through old temples, the drip of rain on ancient rock, the heartbeat beneath the chest. These are time too, speaking in their gentlest voice. The ancients lived within time as one might live within a river, surrounded, carried, never separate. They did not race against it. They moved with it. The day was born with the sun and died with the stars. The year began with the flood, the harvest, or the rising of a single bright star. Their calendars were carved, not in paper, but in life itself. Today, our clocks are smaller, our seconds sharper. Time sits in our pockets and glows from our walls. Yet still, beyond all the precision, the same ancient rhythm endures, the earth turning, the seasons changing, the stars keeping watch. It has never stopped. It has only grown quieter beneath the noise. If one could strip away the numbers and the hours, what would remain? Perhaps only the steady dance of light and shadow, the patience of dawn, the slow kindness of twilight. Perhaps time's true soul is not in its passage, but in our awareness of it, in how we fill each moment with meaning, or simply allow it to pass, unmeasured and pure dot. When an Egyptian priest watched the Nile rise, when a Babylonian marked the stars, when a monk heard the bell, each was listening to the same eternal song, a song without beginning or end, a song of life unfolding in rhythm. We, too, are part of that song. Every breath, every heartbeat, every quiet evening is a verse in the same melody sung since the dawn of civilization. To know time, truly, is to feel one's smallness and belonging. To understand that we do not own it, we share it. So let us slow our clocks, if only in spirit. Let us look to the horizon as our ancestors once did, and feel the old comfort of cycles, morning and night, growth and rest, birth and return. For even now, as we chase the seconds and measure our days, somewhere the ancient sun still rises over a quiet river. The same stars still trace their circles above a sleeping world, and time, patient and eternal, smiles. It has always been with us. It will always remain, not as a ruler, but as a companion. The ancients taught us how to count it, but they also taught us how to honor it, and in remembering them, we remember ourselves. Part of the same endless rhythm, moving gently through the universe, within the soul of time. And so, our journey through the ages of timekeeping comes to rest. From the shadow of sundials to the ticking of clocks, we've followed the rhythm that still guides us all. Thank you for listening to Go to Sleep Historian, where the past whispers softly to help you drift into dreams. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe and join us again for another quiet walk through history. Until then, close your eyes, breathe with the stars, and let time carry you gently into sleep.